Rambam, we begin today the laws of Truma. We finished yesterday the laws of Matnas Aniyim, charitable laws, gifts to the poor. We begin today the laws of Truma. Truma means a separation. This is one of the gifts that were given to the Kohanim, to the priests. Approximately, it's about 2% of your produce, right, that you give to the Kohen, because the Kohen doesn't get any land of Israel, and they do the service in the sanctuary. So this is in the stead of doing God's holy work and not having any land to have their own produce. Okay, so Hilchos Trumos, they contain 8 mitzvahs, 2 positive and 6 negative. They are to separate Truma Gedolah, to separate Trumas Meiser. We'll see all the difference in these terms. Not to separate the Trumas and the tithes in an improper order, but instead to separate them in prescribed order. That one other than a priest and a kohen should not partake of Truma. That no one other should really say.
Chapter 1.
Yeah, we're in the prelude. Number 5, that even a servant of a kohen or his worker should not partake of Truma. Then an uncircumcised person not to partake of Truma. Then an impure priest not partake of Truma. That a chalal, which is a kohen that is a priest that is kind of lost his status, not partake of Truma or from the portion of the sacrifice given to Kohanim. These mitzvahs are explained in ensuing chapters. Okay, number 1. According to scriptural law, the obligation to separate the Trumas and the tithes apply only in Eretz Yisrael, only in the land of Israel. It applies whether the temple is standing or not. The prophets ordained that these obligations should be observed in Babylon as well, right? Because they're adjacent to the Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and the majority of the Jewish people journey to and from there. So there was, a majority of Jews were actually in Babylon after the destruction of the first temple. So rabbinic law made it that you have to keep it there too, but that's rabbinic law, okay? The sages of the early generations ordained they also observed the lands of Egypt, the lands of Ammon and Moab, because they are on the peripheries of Eretz Yisrael. So Ammon and Moab, right here. Here's Moab, right? That's where, right, what they started up with Bilam and Balak, right? And Ammon is over here on top. So they're, Transjordan. And our sages in early generations after the prophets, generation following Ezra, the second during the second temple. Number 2, whenever Eretz Yisrael is mentioned, the intent is the lands conquered by the king of Israel or a prophet with the consent of the entire Jewish people. This is called the conquest of the community. Right? If, however, an individual Jew or a family or a tribe go and conquer a place for themselves, even as the land of given to Abraham, it is not considered Eretz Yisrael in the sense that one is obligated to observe the mitzvahs there. Right? We just learned in Chumash, right, about Ruvain and Gad that they want to Transjordan, right? Now we're talking only about fulfillment of mitzvahs, because Abraham was given 10 nations, 7 in Canaan and 3 that are Transjordan, right? For this reason, Joshua and his court divided the entire land of Israel into tribal portions, even though it was not conquered entirely at that time. And this way, every tribe would ascend and conquer its portion. It would not be considered as merely an individual conquest, right? So, yeah, because it took sometimes hundreds of years. King David finally took over Temple Mount, right? That was the Yevusim um, were in control of, and he actually bought it. He actually bought it, um, and that was hundreds of years later. So, yeah. But Joshua divided it initially, so therefore it would be considered part of the conquest, even if it wasn't conquered yet. So it's considered part of the land of Israel. The lands which King David conquered outside of the land of Canaan, Aram, Naharayim, Aram and Seva, Achlab, and the like, regional contemporary Syria up north, right? Even though he was a king of Israel and he was acting with the consent of the high court, it's not considered the land of Israel with regard to all matters, nor is it like the diaspora, Babylonia, and Egypt with regard to all matters. Instead, it was removed from the category of the diaspora, but did not enter in the category of Eretz Yisrael. So why was the level considered lower than of Eretz Yisrael? He conquered, because David conquered them before he conquered all of Eretz Yisrael. Instead, there were still members of 7 nations there. If, however, he had conquered Eretz Yisrael entirely in all of its boundaries, and after he's conquered all other lands, the entire conquest would have been equivalent to Eretz Yisrael with regard to these matters. And the lands of the King David conquered are called Syria. So the important point over here is that when it's conquering, it's got to be conquered for the sake of the land of Israel that is all a part of. And it's done for the community, for the entire community, as opposed to piecemeal. Excuse me, I just have to get a coffee. Give me a second.
Lehaim.
Hi.
No, it's okay. Oh. Did you put it for tomorrow? Yeah, but there's no water. It's okay. Okay, and I just put it to heat it. Yeah. Okay, that's okay. It's fine. Okay, leave it. You turn it off. No, because I turned it off. It's okay. Okay. I put the coffee in there, not the water. Okay. Sorry, folks. So since he conquered it individually rather part of the collective whole, I'll look further into this to get more clarity. Okay, so let's see about this. Okay, there are dimensions of the laws that apply to Syria that resembles the laws that apply to Eretz Yisrael.
Golan Heights, is that part of Syria? Was that Syria or Lebanon? The ones conquered from
Oh, you mean
Syria that they took it from? You regained it? Or Lebanon? Syria, okay.
Syria.
That's happening there now. Okay, gotcha. They are involved.
So there are dimensions of laws that apply to Syria. There resembles the laws of Eretz Yisrael, and there are dimensions of laws that resemble those that they apply to the diaspora. So he's going to make, right. A person who purchases land in Syria is comparable to one who purchases land in Eretz Yisrael with regard to Trumas, tithes, and sabbatical year. All the laws that apply in Syria are of rabbinic origin. Yeah, we have to have a proper map for this. Okay. All the lands that the Jews who ascended from Egypt took possession of were sanctified in the first conquest of the land. When they were exiled, the sanctity was nullified. In other words, the sanctity wasn't there means that the mitzvahs, right, were not in effect. And we're talking about mitzvahs of the land. Remember, we're talking now truma. So this is the first, well, not the first mitzvah, because we had it before about kaloyim, about mixed, seeding and so on, right, and grafting and all that stuff. But here we're talking about the gifts that you have to give of the land too, right? So the question is, when does this mitzvah apply?
Rabbinical or biblical?
Well, biblical, right? And rabbinic, we need to know distinction. So what he's saying now is, when we were conquered from the land, it still was our land, but it wasn't now biblically obliged to take truma, to give the 2% to the Kohen, for example. So if you still live there, you didn't have to do that biblically, right? Rabbinically is yes, but not biblically. That's what he's saying. Why? Because the sanctity of the land was nullified. The sanctity is what makes the obligation to do the mitzvah, because the mitzvah is sanctity, right? So Rashal's the initial conquest came about because of the conquest. So since how we got the land to begin with was through conquest, when we got conquered, right, the first holy temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and we went into exile into Babylon. So now we lost the sanctity of the land. We didn't lose connection to the land. Sanctity means the obligation that comes with the sanctity, right? Which means the biblical law of truma in our instance over here. So that was lost, right? Its consecration was effective for the time, was under their rule, but not for all time as a result. Right. But when by contrast descended the exiles descended from Babylon and took possession of the portion of the land, they consecrated it the second time. This consecration perpetuate forever from the time and for all time. Ezra was the second holy temple that he came with from Babylon, right? So even though but it's interesting. So actually, the first time there was no rabbinic law then for doing the mitzvahs. It's only the second time it became rabbinic law. It's not based on biblical law, because the biblical law is the only time you have sanctity of the land is when most of the Jewish people are on the land, majority of the Jewish people. And the second holy temple, when Ezra came, majority of the Jewish people didn't come. Okay? The sages left those places that had been settled by the Jews who ascended from Egypt, but were not settled by those who ascended from Babylon. in their previous halachic status and did not exempt them from the obligation of truma and tithes, so that the poor could rely on the sabbatical year. Our holy teacher released Beit Shan from those places that the Jews that sinned from Babylon did not take hold of. Decided that Ashkelon should be exempt from tithes. Hold on.
Where did they mean descended from Babylon?
After the destruction of the first temple, they went to Babylon, right? For 70 years. And then came the second building of the second holy temple. That was through Ezra. Few did, but most of them went to Babylon, and it came about from the exiles of Babylon came back to Israel. But it was not a majority of the people. Thus, the entire earth is divided into three categories in relation to mitzvahs involved in the land: Eretz Yisrael, Syria, and the diaspora. Eretz itself is divided into two categories: those portions settled by the Jews that ascended from Babylon, and those portions were settled by the Jews who ascended from Egypt. The diaspora is divided into two categories: Egypt, Babylon, Ammon, and Moab, in which mitzvahs are observed according to the decrees of the sages and the prophets, and the other lands which the obligation of the tributes and tithes are not observed. Okay. I actually have to stop here, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have
Thank you, Rabbi.
important stuff that we should know well.